first going to hear from Miguel Robles Duran, who had graciously offered this space for tonight at the new school.
This is going to be quite fast. I mean, it's mostly a protocol. I just want to say that within these large structural institutions of what we tend to deem as old school forms of education, there are always dissident spaces within of people and of groups and programs and centers that are trying to push things within. And I'm currently the proud director of one of those spaces, which is the Masters in Science in Urban Ecologies. We've been trying to do these for more than 12 years. I see a lot of faces that have been in our programs and so forth, and we are incredibly happy and just absolutely amazing that we can support and do a partnership with Shape of Cities to Come Institute, which is, in our view, a type of pedagogical project that is thinking forward beyond the sort of the strongholds of structural knowledge that is kept normally in these institutions. So thank you very much. I'll leave you with Coco, and yeah, thanks a lot. Okay. I was going to say Spanish.
Hey, y'all. How's everyone feeling tonight? Oh, wow. Let me ask again. We made some milestones to get here. Thank you all for coming tonight. How are you all feeling? I love it. Immense gratitude for coming together tonight. To all of you, to the Shape of Cities to Come Institute crew, to Joel and Pau for doing Spanish interpretation, to Luigi for documenting the event, and to the many, many direct action movements that have contributed to the hard-earned lessons and freedom dreaming that we'll be doing tonight. So before we begin, I invite you to take a moment and look at who is gathered here. Please take a look around you. Feel free to hold each other's gaze for a moment, recognize each other's presence. So this is our coalition for the night. I ask you that you treat it with focus and care. When we come together from our different lineages, this is the soil from which new relationships, new organizations, new institutions, new societies can bloom. So let's make the most of this convergent space tonight. My name is Connor Thomas Reed. I also go by Coco. Welcome, all pronouns. I'm involved with the Shape of Cities to Come Institute and also the author of New York Liberation School. There are copies in the back if you wanted to check it out. And just real quick, SCCI is this emerging cultural and social movement incubator here in New York. We're bringing together artists, teachers, community organizers from around New York City to study, play, and act together in concert with a much larger, very active, dynamic ecosystem here in New York. This is our second public dialogue after one in December called Speculative Futures, Abolitionist Histories. And SCCI is in the process of designing these exciting campaigns that we'll be launching across the city later this year. So if you're curious, if you're excited to build with us, please stay connected at shapeofcitiestocome.org. We're also on Instagram, LinkedIn, and through word of mouth, on the streets, at jail support, in the art build, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We are with you in struggle. This is a time of immeasurable grief and outrage. We're all mourning senseless violence, starvation, and the collapse of social well-being in places like Gaza, the West Bank, Sudan, Haiti, and beyond. So I want for us to take a moment of silence to honor those who have died or are in anguish in different parts of the world. I ask that we hold the stakes of this moment in our conversation tonight. So just to get a sense of your familiarity with this theme coming into the room, how many of you have been involved in a direct action before? Feel free to raise your hand. Okay. So we intentionally made this event title plural because we want to focus on the extraordinary range of ways that we can use direct actions against those in power and the flows of capital. So with strikes, sit-ins, boycotts, blockades. but also direct actions in support of each other. So mutual aid, resource redistribution, housing and legal solidarity with asylum-seeking migrants. We also want to consider direct action not just as various kinds of tactics, but also as a strategic orientation to building our campaigns, to confronting and recreating power relations, addressing harm, and loving each other. Finally, we're thinking of direct actions as symbolic kinds of protests and such, but also as material, concrete acts of disruption or solidarity. So I invite you to think with us tonight on these three axes of considering direct action. Direct actions against those who oppose us or for each other, direct actions that are tactical or strategic, and direct actions that are symbolic or material. And this will hopefully get us to more dynamically be thinking and practicing our effective struggles in the long term. Now, I just want to say I am really thrilled that you all are going to hear the brilliance of the four people who are joining me here. We're going to be hearing from these four phenomenal practitioners on various kinds of direct actions. In terms of the flow of things, then I'll ask a couple of questions up here, and we'll have plenty of time for questions, answer, dialogue with all of you in the room. So I hope that you're ready to participate as we go. For the sake of time, we had gotten to share the bios for the four participants up here in advance of this event, so I encourage you to look at that. But in order of the presentations, we'll first get to hear from Lisa Fithian, then Minahil Akbar, then Bri Calderon Navarro, and then Juan Carlos Ruiz. And it's also give you a sense of our flow for the night. So with that, I want to introduce Lisa to get things going. And very much so, when I think of the words direct action, that is synonymous with Lisa Fithian. So please give a warm, warm welcome for Lisa to get us started.
Good evening, everyone, and buenas noches. So my name is Lisa. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, to family, European descent, but family with roots in the South. But was moved outside of New York City when I was like 2 or 3 years old. So I consider New York pretty much my home. My parents split when I was young. He was in the city, so it's really lovely to be in the city because I move around a lot. And I discovered direct action at a young age. It was really in high school because I learned that there was injustice. And then I watched how people coming together could actually confront that and change things. And that was enough to launch an entire lifetime of doing direct action in the US and around the world. I'm really thrilled that an institute called The Shape of Cities to Come is exploring the ideas of direct action. Because we're in big trouble. The state of our world, we can see with the wars in Palestine and Haiti and around the world, Africa, with the climate continuing to crash, quite frankly, with the rise of fascism, which at the rate we're going, we may see another Trump presidency, and they have every intention of dismantling almost anything that has any humanity to it. So we're facing a lot of big things. And in urban centers are always areas that are always under attack when there's system change. Because it's a place where all the intersections of power, wealth, privilege, poverty all come together, race. So, you talked a little bit about direct action being tactical or mutual aid. Yes, direct action is that. In many ways, it's, can we put a definition in here? Am I doing this? You know, okay, yeah, we can do it. Cool, we'll see. You know, one of the things about direct action, you know, people have different definitions, but it's really about being willing to do something in the moment ourselves. It's not waiting for someone else. So for me, in many ways, direct action is more than a tactic. It's more than a strategy. It's a way of life. Because we live in a culture here in the United States that's quite toxic, and we've all been socialized into believing certain things about ourselves and others. almost all of it negative and destructive. So when we make a decision to engage in direct action, we're actually beginning the process of decolonizing ourselves. Because to really be engaged in direct action, it's not just about what we're changing in our community or in our city. A lot of it is about what we are changing in ourselves. Because each and every one of us was taught that we have no power, what we do doesn't make a difference. We're led to believe that power is corrupt, and we get very confused sometimes about what to do and whether we can make a difference. And I think if you walk out of here with anything tonight, I'd like you to know that you have the power to make a difference. And when you take your power, which is nothing more than the ability to act, when you take your power and you put it together with somebody else and somebody else, right? That's when we're really talking about the power of collective action. One of the reasons I'm such a big advocate of it is because over many years of struggle in many movements, I have found it to be the most rapid and radical process of change that there is. And there's thousands of stories that we'll share some tonight, other people will share some, and maybe they'll do pictures as I go through, who knows. But the piece that I really want people to start thinking about more and more is, what does it take to make a change, especially at scale? I wrote a book called Shut It Down, and the only reason I'm bringing it up right now is because I can't possibly tell the stories. But in the process of writing this book, I learned a lot about complexity science. And as I learned more about it, I began to understand that direct action fit very much with that, and that for real fundamental change to happen, we have to be willing to organize and create a crisis. Yes, there's already a crisis happening, but they're in control of much of that playing field. So what is our ability as a community, through the work that we do together, able to create a crisis that is disruptive enough that the power holders have no choice but to make a change? There's a lot we could talk to on strategy around that and other things, but let me just say right now that throughout history, in this country, in any country, whenever there is oppression, there is resistance. Because our humanity, the spirit that we have, is too powerful to not withstand that repression. People will always act. Even to the beginning of this country, direct action with whatever, here's a slide. Directly stop social things, defend possible whatever. You're gonna have to give me time because I didn't start my timer. Sounding the alarm, create community-based solution, amplify people's voices. All of those things are true, right? But back from the very beginning of the day, some of the first direct actionists in this country beyond indigenous folks were the abolitionist movement, who understood that slavery was an evil on this land and worked to free people. And that's really what direct action is all about today. It's about getting free. It's about living fully with our dignity and our power. So we've seen from the abolitionist movement, protests for women's suffrage right, people going to jail, a labor movement in the 1930s. There was a period over 3 years where 5 million people turned out in the streets, across the board unionization. The lunch counter sit-ins, the beginning of a lot of turning over for civil rights in this country. Back into the 70s, I don't know how many people knew that there was a whole wave to begin to build nuclear weapons in power, but people up in New England said, we're not having that here. And thousands of people descended onto the sites and shut things down. 1,800 people were arrested in one day. And I want to maybe pause for a minute to make a distinction between direct action and civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is a form of direct action. But it is direct action where you are willing to risk to the point of being arrested. Back in the day, it was to challenge an unjust law. Today, it's not quite as clean as that, but we're taking actions every day where people are willing to go to jail for what they believe in. When you're doing direct action, you're not always looking to go to jail. It might be a simple thing of taking over a lobby, or a more complicated thing of shutting down an auto plant, or it might be blocking bridges when the time is right. We saw a lot of that in the George Floyd uprising. Act up, you know. And I guess I would say that, you know, maybe one of the common things here is that when we have skin in the game, when our lives are on the line, and people that we care about lives are on the line, you know, we are compelled to do something. And so in the ACT UP movement, when people were dying of AIDS, you saw this amazing movement that just shut things down left and right, Wall Street, etc. Brilliant creativity, and eventually did succeed in getting the medications developed that were needed. It took 8 years or so. This is a campaign in DC, Justice for Janitors, a union fight. They tried organizing for 10 years to unionize, didn't get anywhere. We did these 3 weeks of action, shutting things down, the 14th Street Bridge, taking over buildings, getting arrested, on, and they finally won. Thousands of janitors won and have continued to win across the country by we were blocking the 14th Street Bridge. In fact, we blocked one of the bridges in DC, and we were called traffic terrorists. The AAA called us that. Congress did things. So, you know, when we do direct action, the state understands our power, and so they do what they can to stop us. And one of the things they do is they criminalize us, they brutalize us, they surveil us, and if we're not careful, we criminalize ourselves. I've seen this happen before. It happens, we do it to ourselves. If like somebody's like, oh, that person, da da da, and we might distance. And we start operating with a lot of fear. And that's something that our movements right now around Palestine have to seriously look at. You know, we have seen growing repression out of the Cop City fight in Atlanta, and just since the Homeland Security creation, all that. But I also want to say to people, back in history and time, fear is fear, death is death, violence is violence. Every generation faces repression and violence and finds a way to persevere. What's happening in this movement right now, I feel in many ways, is that we're turning in on ourselves out of fear. We're afraid to get to know each other, afraid to ask each other's names, right? We're afraid to share information that we used to call publicly. You know, janitors, like the World Trade Organization in 1999. Believe me, there was state repression back then, but we basically said, we're going to shut it down. And we did what we needed to do, trained thousands of people, formed structures of affinity groups and spokes councils, which have been used in many movements over many decades, found a great way to shut it down. I'm not gonna go into all the details of the story. And what happens is that when you're open and honest, it's an opportunity to bring more people in. And so fundamentally, direct action is an organizing process. And when you do it well, it's a holistic organizing process that meets the needs of the community that has come together. Right, so again, we think about direct action as a tactic here or there, but in Common Ground, when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, and then when Hurricane Sandy hit New York, you saw a movement rooted in decentralized, direct action folks who showed up and built a parallel infrastructure to society. In New Orleans, I don't know what pictures are in here, but we set up food distribution, medical stuff, we actually had the first civilian clinic. We had transportation, right? We built a parallel society. And I say this because, and the same thing happened under Sandy, like there was an amazing what happened under Hurricane Sandy. You may or may not know about what happened here in New York 10 years ago. But it's to say that we actually have the ability, through taking direct action, to create the infrastructure that is needed to support us in life. And when we understand that, we can begin to understand how that might inform how we think about cities. Are we gonna wait till they start the process of saying it's fine to do guerrilla gardens all across the city or on the roofs of our buildings? No, we might just go do them. Why wait for the policy? So, what time are we at? Okay, so, and this is the last thing, that's my book, that's my last slide, right? Yes, There are small things that can happen and big things that happen. There are private things that happen. There are public things that happen. There are roles of high risk and no risk. The thing about direct action, when we understand it is the process by which we set ourselves free, we build a culture that is sustainable, we are able to engage in meaningful action to change our conditions. That's where we actually can reclaim our life and our humanity. And I'll just say that one of the sweet spots I've learned, and I'll wrap it up here, because again, there's thousands of stories and maybe we'll riff more, is that how many of you are organizers, or think you're an organizer, or could be an organizer?
Oh, y'all are being shy. Come on now.
Well, I'm gonna just pretend all of you are organizers, because that's really what we need. We need people who are willing to talk to other people, ask them to do things, ask them to join our hand, ask them to get involved, because at the end of the day, our power is the numbers of people that we have, and our creativity, our imagination, our bravery. That's really where we have the power. And if we don't start doing that, especially in this time of war, like, it's hard to think about how you win wars. One thing we know is that it takes a popular mandate, enough people to say no mas, no more. And how are we gonna do that if we're not out there talking to people and organizing people, if we stay insular? So this is a time where all of us have an opportunity. And even honestly, especially if you're shy, just getting yourself to go have a conversation with somebody could be a lot. It might really challenge you. You might be afraid. And that's okay. And you can do it anyway. Because that's one of the things I've learned. This stuff is scary. But we can act with courage, especially when we're with other people. If we're alone, it's hard to get there. But what I do know is that there are thousands of other people around this city, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions around the world, that are crying for a change. They are our family. And the more that we can continue to build that network and build that decentralized network of relationships that are based in providing strategy and creativity and infrastructure, we can build new cities. We can change the conditions of our lives and our families and our friends. And so this is a big invitation to all of you to get your direct action game on and be out in the streets. Thank you very much.
And then let's get to hear from Minahal Akbar.
Hey y'all, my name is Minahal. I take they, she pronouns. This is my face. I don't like people making up my face, so showing it to you once, so you don't have to do that. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Coco, for bringing us together and the Shape the Cities to Come Institute. And it's so nice to be here with Lisa, who I've had the pleasure of working on some actions with in the last few months. So I'm going to talk specifically about Palestine solidarity since October. Yeah. First, I'll just share a little bit about myself, where I come from, how I entered into a relationship with direct action. Yeah, so I am an immigrant. I moved here from Pakistan when I was 7 with my family, and I've grown up for the most part in New York. Yeah, have a relatively privileged immigration story. My family came on a student visa, that then became a work visa, that then became a green card, that became citizenship. And even that privileged immigration story was very traumatic and messed up and radicalized me. So here we are. I think, not growing up as a young person, not being a citizen, nearly having to leave the country when my dad lost his job, and seeing him be trapped outside at points, meant I was able to understand the oppression caused by the system, and over time, as I studied and I saw how it is interlocking with, especially the carceral system, became a leftist and started utilizing direct action in order to channel my rage into something. So it's actually really refreshing to be here tonight and talk about direct action as something that is also about creating, because oftentimes I do think of it as a way to like go against, right? But even as I was thinking about the kinds of direct actions I mostly participate in, which is like shutting down a bridge, which is what I'm gonna talk about today, there's an element of creating there too, which is like creating support, creating community, and most like formally what I could think aligns with this is like creating the infrastructure of jail support. When people are arrested, they come out to see people who care about them and are gonna support them. Yeah, so while I'm privileged to be part of an ecosystem of organizing here, where there's a lot of different kinds of direct actions, and we all engage in a diversity of tactics, today I'm gonna be focusing on the January 8th Bridges and Tunnels action. Yeah, and much of my role in the current uprising has been as a direct action practitioner, specifically engaged in mass civil disobedience. So that's gonna be my focus. Bridges and tunnels. So before I get into a little bit more about it, I'm just gonna show a video.
Hundreds of people blocking traffic in and out of Manhattan. The Brooklyn Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge, and the Holland Tunnel, all briefly shut down by protesters.
Yeah, so that was the action. We shut down the Brooklyn Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge, and the Holland Tunnel. We held these for about 1.5 to 2.5 hours, the range of times, utilizing a combination of hard and soft blockades. So that means you saw the police like putting a saw into something that was a tire with cement filled in it, and you put your arm in it. That's a hard blockade, so having like a physical item that you're locking into, right? So I wanted to share a bit about how we came together, why, what we saw of that moment, and the opportunity and the need. We came together around a demand for escalation and greater coalition building, right? So we, an organizer with one of the groups that was involved, pulled in several folks they knew from other groups, and proposed a multi-site cross-organizational action. So the people involved were the rank and file members, not leadership, from the Palestinian Youth Movement, Al-Auda, Samidun, the DSA, Jewish Voice for Peace, PSL, Critical Resistance, and Writers Against the War in Gaza. And I wanted to share, this is our press statement, but something I wanted to focus on here is this part at the top, where it says this protest was organized by an autonomous collective that includes members of the following groups. So I say that, and it's very important because in a way we were taking power, right? We saw that like the groups that we love and organize with and are putting a lot of time into maybe couldn't officially come together in this way, so we were doing it and it wasn't sanctioned, and it was a way to sort of like have those groups come together, bypassing some of the red tape that goes with officially doing that, right? And it also meant it would hopefully create more openings and channels of communication between those groups. Yeah, and we saw basically there was massive interest in and infrastructure built out for mobilizing hundreds of people for civil disobedience. This was shortly after we had 800 people come out for JVP's Manhattan Bridge shutdown, and then they stayed there. And this is after, you know, JVP had been building an infrastructure all around the country for taking huge actions, and they did this employing the affinity group model that Lisa mentioned, and I won't get into the history of that, but basically it's like, get your crew together, everyone get your crew together, and then there's like one person who's coming to the center, and you're all talking, and the organizers are telling those people, here's what's happening. It's a way of like decentralizing, building trust amongst a smaller group of people, and also recruiting hundreds to 1,000 people to show up for these big actions, right? We saw that this infrastructure had been created, right? But we were dissatisfied with the way it was being used. I was an affinity group lead for JVP, and while huge credit to them for the infrastructure they built up and the way they've been they escalated, it was deeply frustrating after several months to see it continuing to not go further, right? Not call for more than ceasefire, not, the atmosphere just wasn't what we felt was needed, and it was mostly symbolic and not what we felt material enough. So we wanted to escalate on both the tactical and the messaging front. So this meant multi-site, this meant hard blockades, this meant beyond ceasefire, right? So you'll see here 4 sites of action, 5 demands. The 5 demands were outlined in the video, so I won't go into them again, but we were really centering PYM's 5 demands, the first being ceasefire, but then the 4 beyond that as well. So our goals, the interventions we were trying to make, I shared a few of those, but a big one also was so material disruption over the goal of media attention, right? While media attention is also very important, right? That's why Wawa being in the mix was huge. They have a lot of connections. They were able to get a lot of folks to cover the event. Scaling up in hard blockades collectively. Security culture, you'll see in the video, almost everyone was masked. And we also had discrete in-person trainings for each site, right? In the past, what we've seen with these big mass civil disobediences is a big Zoom meeting where you tell everyone all at once, probably the night before, about what the action is. We did a week out having AG leads come to a site in person so that we could talk together, get to know each other, see each other's faces, and build trust, as well as empower AG leads, who then went and trained their own AGs, right? So we're scaling up, and we also feel greater ownership of the action that's happening. So I just wanted to talk a bit about the aftermath of the action. It was one of the first direct actions on that scale of mass, hundreds of people coming and getting arrested, or risking arrest, organized, that included Palestinian organizers, right? And so the detainment we faced was far worse than what we've seen and what we were frankly prepared for. We know legally you're allowed to hold people for up to 24 hours, but we were not prepared for that, I think. People were held for 15 hours. It was very emotionally taxing and difficult for folks. People were also doxxed, particularly our Palestinian comrades. And there was a lot of aftercare involved in terms of the building, right? You have to reach back out to those folks and make sure, even months after, how are they doing? How has their livelihood been impacted, either by the detainment and the doxing, and making sure that people aren't being left out of the movement because we don't do the work to ensure that that traumatic experience hasn't been embedded within them in a way that it leaves them out from participating in the future, right? And I'll also say I think there's been more, it's very unfortunate that even here now we are still fighting for a ceasefire, but we see that there's embedded within the conversations and the discourse that when we inshallah get a ceasefire, people aren't gonna stop coming out into the streets, because we've already all put that out there, right? That we need more than ceasefire, we need Palestinian liberation. We've also seen more autonomous actions and horizontalization And unfortunately, we've seen more police escalation, right? Like as we all skill up together, we learn how to shut shit down, and more people learn how to do that, and more people find each other and do that together, the police are gonna respond in kind. So I just wanted to talk briefly about what we've seen. Before I do that, actually, one thing I did wanna note is a big intervention we wanted to make in direct actions also was this idea that the goal of, again, civil disobedience, which is just one kind of direct action, that the goal of civil disobedience is arrest. We were very clear to be like, the goal is not arrest. The goal is jamming the arteries of this city, fucking with capitalism and the capitalistic forces that allow all this to happen, and making clear that we're not going away, right? Like material disruption, making the city lose money, right? We literally like put that out there in our statement, how much money they lose when the Holland Tunnel isn't functioning. And we part of how we, I think, tried to have that shift take place, because something that was really disturbing for me, especially as someone who works with incarcerated comrades, is the way people were talking about detainment and arrest as something that's easy to risk. And something we tried to make clear in this is it's not. It's also gonna be different from being arrested in a group of entirely white folks, right? And it's a tactic, and it's part of that. And we also said if within 4 hours we're not all arrested, we will leave, and we had an exit strategy. So we made very clear, even in the planning and the contingency plans, that arrest is not the goal. It is something we are willing to risk. The goal is the material disruption. Yeah. And then I just wanted to show what's been happening since then. More autonomous actions. There's like a call to, so you'll see the Palestine is everywhere, which just happened, and it's been like taking up space places, also going and like doing what the normies call vandalism, what we call redecoration as part of that, and civil disobedience. And then the Stop Cop City also had marches, and yeah, just wanted to note like the encouragement for autonomous action, like building a container and then putting it out there for folks who've all started to find each other and build those connections. And from here, I just think we continue to escalate, really focus on building those connections. We're seeing de-occupation be employed as a tactic more. We're seeing care work be prioritized more as people see that this is a struggle for the long haul, right? We can't burn ourselves out. We've all made that mistake before. And we're also seeing possibly greater international coordination. I encourage folks to look at the April 15 coordinated economic blockade to free Palestine. Yeah, people are talking across geographies. Yeah, thank you so much.
We're now going to get to hear from Bri Calderon Navarro.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Bree. My pronouns are she, her. I live in Brooklyn. I'm gonna just talk from my personal experience. Quiero hablar un poco en español también para pues agradecer a los que vienen, las personas de descendencia latinoamericana también, bienvenidos. And my Spanish context will be made clear in the presentation as well as we go. So I came to New York in 2012 from Florida. I grew up the daughter of two Mexican immigrant parents. I'm first generation here. And in Florida, I didn't see a lot of options for me to really have a very creative and expressive life. I never really felt like I fit in. I had a really hard time living in a place where if I were to tell someone that I aspired to be an artist, I wasn't really taken seriously, but I saw like New York as kind of a beacon where if you come to New York and you introduce yourself and you tell someone, I'm an artist or I'm interested in these creative things, there isn't like so much of an interrogation. People kind of take that as like a level of respect. They kind of come with that just because New York is just a much more open place. So I studied at CUNY, which is where I met Coco, and shout out to Coco.
Shout out to CUNY!
Those are not my words. It did bring me here, so. But what I was kind of doing, my first years in New York, I wasn't with my family. I didn't have my strict Latina background, to hold me back. So I was kind of a rebel on the streets in my early years in New York. And I got really involved with indigenous causes from the get-go. In 2014, 2015, a lot of the work that was being done to stop pipelines that were being constructed on indigenous land was something that called to me spiritually, and so I was protesting a lot of that, kind of this like environmental, indigenous context. And then also, as a student in CUNY, I felt like I was connecting a lot of my struggles to the frustrations that I had even within this institution, and I came to realize that even though I left Florida, things in New York weren't exactly this kind of idealized, naive kind of version that I had dreamed of, and I was still facing a lot of repression even within the school environment that brought me here. And I did a lot of protesting within the school system with Coco. We would go to board of trustee meetings, and one of the big things that I came to learn is that these people had so much power that I thought were there to nurture us as students and care for us. As soon as we went with our tear-filled eyes and our grievances that we couldn't afford our tuition and we couldn't afford to eat, and we were having all these struggles, all of these administrators, they would sit on these kind of elevated, these like pedestaled tables, and their eyes would glaze over, and it was like we didn't even exist at all, and that kind of brought out a lot of my frustration in those years. I remember heckling administrators, chasing them down hallways, and a lot of it was just like wanting to be seen, like wanting to feel like I existed, like I wasn't like this just mirage, this figment, this person that started to not even feel real sometimes. And then in 2020, I started to get into something really focused on food, and it was kind of like this completely different direction for me. But the seeds were planted when I was organizing at CUNY, because one of the things that I started to kind of learn intersectionally was that within the CUNY system, I think it's like over 50% of the students are food insecure and experiencing hunger. And I was food insecure when I was at school too. I remember agonizing, trying to figure out like what could I even like scrape together to like get enough food between classes, and I learned that it was actually required for our school to have a food pantry, but the food pantry didn't exist. And so one of the things that when we were trying to complain and have all these grievances and get the attention of the administrators, one of the things that we were able to kind of knock out of the park is that we were able to coincidentally pressure them to put a food pantry on the Hunter College campus, which had not been done before despite advocacy for it for over 6 years. And the way that the turnover was so quick, from going 6 years telling us they couldn't put a food pantry on campus for the students because of zoning codes and all these things, we basically poked holes in their arguments, showed the hypocrisy that they were renting out parts of the school for privatization, and there was no resistance to that, to like renting out like a huge portion of our school lobby to Starbucks. And they were just saying, oh, well, the kids can eat at Starbucks. And we're like, no, we need a food pantry. It's not the same thing, right? And so I started to get really into food justice because that was one of the few things that I feel like I'm really, really proud of that ended up coming from all of that hardship at Hunter at CUNY. And so this was in the pandemic, starting to redistribute food with these refrigerators. This was a direct action that also kind of what felt like such an anomaly, like such a weird phenomenon that could really only catch fire in the pandemic when there was a sense of lawlessness to the city. Because I just feel like when I first came to New York, like that was like during Bloomberg era, like I really feel like before the pandemic, like something like this would have been shut down within 24 hours, like immediately. Like the health department would have just come immediately and like cut the cable to these refrigerators. But because it was the pandemic and like there was like nobody knew what was even going on, it kind of there was like this like moment of like suspending kind of logic or like that kind of like really repressive like formal structures that would like otherwise exist in the city. And I think because this became so popular during the pandemic, I'm curious to know who's seen a community fridge before? Like, does this, right?
Hey.
That's so cool. That's so cool that so many people here like is familiar with this. And that protected these things because they still run to this day. And 3 years, past the inception of this, they're here to stay and they're helping thousands of people all over the city. And so some of the text was a little funky, but so at this center, which I helped co-found in Bed-Stuy in 2021, we have 4 community fridges that are still running, and we just try to find like a more structured place because after spending a year putting food in these refrigerators and talking to neighbors and shoveling snow around the refrigerators to protect them, being rained on, nearly having a heat stroke in the summer, trying to offload boxes from U-Hauls that we would ride to get all this food. We needed like a home base in order to sustain the work. And so a bunch of us kind of came together, and I'm not the only person that can tell the story of collective focus, which is what you're looking at here. I'm just telling my version of the story, but it was a lot of us that came together to make this into our headquarters, and to just continue to protect this work because we knew that eventually that kind of suspension of normality was going to end. People were going to have to go back to work, and we wanted to ensure that we could keep doing this work and adapt to kind of things going back to normal, which none of us here feel normal, but
Got a couple minutes.
yes. So collective focus, food impact. We have distributed over $1 million in goods in the past 3 years to 79,000 people. That's with 2 weekly food pantries, serving 200,000 pounds of free food to 7,800 families. And with our refrigerators in particular, we do food rescues. That's 90,000 pounds of food that would have been straight to the landfill, but instead our drivers intercept that food from the Trader Joe's warehouse, from photo shoots in Steinway Studios, from Panera Bread, a bunch of places that for them, it's easier for them if we deal with their food and then we put them in their refrigerators. It's culminated to 580 food rescues in the past 3 years. For goods, we also give out clothing, free clothing, kind of like the way people would just donate to a thrift store, Salvation Army, Goodwill, but instead of reselling your clothes, we just give it out for free. Or volunteers like me will keep them because a lot of cute stuff comes through. And so we've given out almost $700,000 worth of free clothing, and providing an average of about 1,000 free items per week. And we've also given out, we've also organized over 178 events and workshops, because when you have all these resources coming together, people start to make friendships, they're hanging out. Sometimes we'll put a speaker outside and have music, and then that turned into doing yoga sometimes at the space, having little workshops and fairs and special events, and then a lot of our events also helped fundraise to keep the space open, because that also is a whole other presentation that I could talk about. But one of the things that kind of came to be is that in 2021, a few months after we opened the space, this indigenous artisan group that was in Bushwick, well actually kind of all over New York, approached me at Collective Focus, came into the space saying, we want to do these cultural events. And it kind of resonated with me because one of the things that really convinced me to kind of open the space up to them, even though I didn't really know much about them at the beginning, was that they were saying that they felt invisible, and they felt like they just needed a space to feel real and feel like that they could express their traditional heritage, which this particular group is from Guerrero, Mexico. And me resonating with that was like, yeah, let's do it. And so we did a Day of the Dead event. This was also very reactionary to the pandemic because a lot of immigrants had lost loved ones during the pandemic and were struggling to repatriate the bodies back to their homelands. And there was a real lack of closure for the indigenous migrant community that was definitely overlooked and contributed to them feeling invisible. We did the event again in 2022, and by this time, even though we are a mutual aid organization, we had to start to formalize. We unfortunately became a nonprofit. And we started to get attention from elected officials. We have our council member, Chiose, who came to speak at our event, the Commissioner of Immigrant Affairs. So we started to kind of get into these this weird space where we're doing this work on the ground with unauthorized refrigerators. The government knew about us, they knew what they were doing, but they kind of looked the other way a little bit, and they came for the photo ops, and we were just trying to shake money out of them so we could keep the space running, and it's kind of what my life has turned into. And
If you shake them hard enough, you'll be surprised.
yeah, it's kind of chaotic. In 2023, so last year, we organized 4 cultural events together. I had 2 trips to Mexico to understand better where Tito Romico was coming from. I understood better this kind of the migrant crisis from their familial standpoint, how it's directly impacting them and how it's impacting their push to radicalize and to be authentically themselves in the streets of New York at the face of discrimination, racism, economic barriers, language barriers, and a lot of discreditation, misunderstandings that they unfortunately face. And so from a co-founder of the space, I've transitioned more into a very specific supportive role as the migrant outreach coordinator at Collective Focus. And this, working with this group in particular has been a real passion of mine. In 2024 already, we've organized 3 cultural events, and I've had 1 trip back to Mexico. Now I'm starting to do the same thing, shaking and rattling the elected officials of Mexico as well, seeing what can come of it, all in the name of greater exposure and visibility for people that otherwise would not have that. And so this is just a little QR code in case folks want to get get more involved with stuff like this. Collective Focus is in Brooklyn. Tito Romico has a really awesome international Facebook page where the family members post what they're doing in New York, and then the kind of parallel activities that happen in Mexico because they are an international group. My social media links are in there, some videos, so that's just a little QR in case folks want to dive more. And I've missed a lot of stuff. I'm trying to condense 3-4 years of work into 10 minutes, so there might be more questions and answers. But quiero dar muchas gracias al grupo Tito Romico por abrir sus puertas a mí. Yo los represento aquí en cualquier lugar donde yo pueda estar, siempre llevo su nombre y su trabajo en mi corazón. Muchas gracias.
And last but not least, Juan Carlos Ruiz, giving us a vision that maybe the shape of New York City to come is a sanctuary city. So let's get to hear from one colleague.
So I am a pastor in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, southwest region of Brooklyn. I've been there for just about 5 years. So in our third year, there COVID hit. And we began organizing. Just before that, I was in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. And we were the matrix of what came to be known as Occupy Sunday, the church where I was, which we occupy also. I was an organizer there, not a pastor, and we occupied that as a place of concerned citizens responding after the superstorm Sandy. From there, we occupy other areas just across the affected region from the superstorm Sandy. And we organize under the rubric of mutual solidarity and mutual aid. But in Bay Ridge, in July 22nd, we were about to close down the church to rest after responding to COVID. We went from opening 7 days a week. We were also giving out food, distributing foods. We had a community roof garden. We had a bunch of stuff going on. So we needed to rest, and that's when the waves of immigrants, these recent waves of immigrants, mostly from Venezuela, began to be forced and bused to New York City in July 2022. We couldn't do anything less but to open our doors again in our church. So from wanting to go and take some rest, we opened for 24 hours, 7. So we began sheltering people for the first 6 months, from July 2022 to January 2023. We were a respite sanctuary space. We were housing people, mostly on makeup, on the floor, on pews in the church. Every night we had about 40 families or so resting in our space. Some people were there for 3 days. Some people were there for 3 months. Some of you were helping. I know Rodrigo, Jorge are here, and some others, Genesis, Lori, I can see. The first wave that we began receiving were from Venezuela, people from Venezuela. And as maybe you know, 99% the first 3-4 months that were being bused, asylum seekers that were being bused, were from Venezuela. It's a direct result of our democratic efforts in La República de Venezuela. I think I am being sarcastic a little bit in that sense. But it's the result, of our extractionist tendencies and interventionist policies, foreign policies. And we need to say that loud and clear, okay? So a few weeks back, just about 6 weeks ago, some friends contacted me, some friends from the sanctuary movement contacted me to pay bail for one of the Venezuelans that was involved in the melee in 42nd Street. I don't know if you remember, late December, early January. I wasn't even around, I was in Mexico when I came back, and I got a phone call from a friend and said, can you put bail on this guy was involved? So I saw some of the videos and I said, yeah, why not? You know, it's the most American thing, you know, to do. If the state is offering bail, you go and pay it, why not? So I went, paid it, and then somehow the word got out that this pastor priest from Brooklyn had bailed this guy out. You know, the New York Post had this out. I didn't know how vicious the right-wing media is. For 10 days, we were getting phone calls. I had to suspend all ministries, all church activities because of the hate mail and the phone calling, threatening, not only my person, you know, the people that, we usually get about 500 people to our church, 500 asylum seekers coming to our church for different stuff, different programs, food, clothing, and then we have a huge legal advocacy clinic every Thursday. We have about 100, 150 people every Thursday there, and we are helping them navigating the legal system, legal immigration system. I've been organizing for the last over 20 years, but I hadn't felt really the hatred, you know, which is really organized and which is kind of frightening of, you know, what's coming or what's already here present among us. But I want to say that, you know, I remember the first time I addressed the people from Venezuela that were in my church. And, you know, we had families who had walked for over 4 months. A lot of them barefoot, you know. And this was July, so the weather was merciful to them. But still, I remember addressing them and saying, you know, speaking with them and saying, thank you for reminding us of the work that needs to continue and that needs to be done. You know, we've been playing with this population of immigrants for the last 40 years. The Democratic Party comes into power and they say, we are going to do immigration reform. We are going to give you papers. And then nothing is done. And then you get the Republican Party in power and they do the same. And we have over 12 million people living in the shadows, which has complicated the terrain for us because many of our people that we rely on are really frustrated and angry because it seems that everything is being done for the recent asylum seekers, which in truth does not happen. There is not much going on. Okay, but I think it's the way the machinery works in terms of pitting populations against each other. I lost my train of thought.
Discúlpame, lo siento.
That's okay.
I'm
That's
sorry.
okay. But I had to put, and I said this to my church my church after kind of scolding me, really weaponized that against me, and they tried to get me out of the church. But I do believe in something that needs to be happening with our institutions. Our bodies are, individually we take them into consideration. We are very vulnerable, limited human beings. But as I said to the Venezuelans that day, when we somehow come together and we bring our institutions to account, we can make the change happen. We can model, we can sow the seeds of hope, of liberation in our communities, but we have to be the ones that are willing to risk our comfort. We are the ones who are willing to utilize our privilege. Anything at our disposal can be used to make that change a reality for all of us. I know that racism is very much alive. We need to somehow evaluate, ourselves, our institutions. We need to challenge those dynamics that make people less, that dehumanize people. We need to figure out, and I am glad to be part of, not only with these wonderful people, but with you, with all of you, because we do really need to continue to do some significant work. And I have seen it. From Occupy Sunday to the New Sanctuary Movement to Free Palestine. I mean, I can see the seeds of hope, the realization of freedom in our midst, but we need to still do a lot of work. So I am counting on you. I hope you can count on me.
So a couple of questions. How to welcome people into a few different levels of risk or spiciness. Thinking about focusing on your corner and the kind of effectiveness of disruptions or blockades that may hinder potential allies from being involved. Thinking about whether there are networks for solidarity. There's like collective focus in Bed-Stuy or this church in Bay Ridge, but is there something more citywide that we could point to? And then what are some current actions that people can plug into? So invite y'all to share some thoughts, and then after that we'll kick it back to you all. So have some other comments and questions in mind.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go from the beginning. Also,
Anyone there?
really appreciate the energy in the room, you guys. Very, very lively and makes it easier for us to not get stage fright. So thank you. So how to make things welcoming? I think I can use the community fridges as a case study, and it doesn't necessarily connect exactly to labor movement, but maybe it generates some ideas. But one of the things that happened in the very early stages of the refrigerators is that the refrigerators were really kind of like beat up, and the first fridges in New York didn't receive actually a lot of recognition or a lot of press because they were had been like graffitied over, and they just kind of looked like they blended into the rest of the just kind of like the Bushwick Bed-Stuy landscape. And that it wasn't, there's not necessarily anything wrong with the way that that fridge looked, but we did notice a dramatic difference in the intrigue and the approachability of a refrigerator and cultivating trust with the community when the refrigerators started to get painted with really colorful murals and designs that were super friendly. And they actually, the fridge that I was most aligned with was called the friendly fridge. And it was like, I don't want to say, use like capitalist terms of like branding and marketing and things like that, but in our own way, we did find that that ended up really kind of coaxing people into actually trusting the food that was in the refrigerators. And that was a threshold that was very challenging to kind of get people onto our side. And just the visual language and the signifiers of the fridges transforming into this thing that children were drawn to, that was warm and welcoming and inviting. Yes, lots of refrigerators everywhere, and they're all painted very differently and uniquely. People really love the way that their refrigerators look, and being even part of that kind of like artistic expression of the fridges then was what then took off the movement, because then it was like this colorful, beautiful thing that people were looking forward to seeing. So I think that that translates a lot into like our written communication and like our visual language as organizers, really being really sensitive that the way that our flyers look when we're inviting people to actions, the font that we use, the colors that we choose, they all convey a tone to people. And people who are not very familiar with this kind of work or taking risks, reaching them using these kind of strategies, like these visual cues to reach them, is one of the most effective things that we did to approach the refrigerators. Yeah, so our logo, for example, like the way that we kind of really try to convey that kind of bubbly, playful, curious, just kind of intrigue and interest is what ultimately got us to that point where people now, they're so, like, they don't hesitate to open the door, and they trust that the food in there is going to be good for their bodies. And it is.
Yeah, what else is coming to mind?
So a couple things real quickly. When you're in a protracted fight, when it's going on and on, you don't win, is when it gets really hard, and how do we sustain ourselves? And I actually think that's the moment where our creativity and finding the spaces to be creative and imaginative, like if we can imagine it, we can create it. I was working on a campaign with a bunch of workers, two places are gonna get shut down, 500 workers each. We knew one was gonna close, the other we were fighting to keep open, and it looked like the company announced they were gonna close it. And we just said, you know what, we don't know that we're gonna win, but let's have a hell of a lot of fun kicking their ass as we go down. And we had so much fun, and we saved one of those places and saved 500 jobs, and the 500 workers that lost got the best bailout package. They got a huge package to walk away from. So our creativity is essential. On blocking bridges and roadways, when I was doing that back in the 80s with the janitors, one of the things we did, it was often in the context of a week of action, not a one-off. And we would say through the media, we are going to be shutting the bridges. Do not try and drive this week, the bridges will be closed. And when I look back at what happened here, I thought to myself, I was always imagining blocking inbound traffic, but that action blocked outbound traffic, hoping to congest downtown. There's argument to be made for both, but I'm like, if you're not gonna let people come, well, people could come in, but if you were gonna block the inbound, you could have had people on the Brooklyn or Jersey side saying, don't enter if you don't wanna get stuck. So there are ways that we could help, and then also to always have a flyer that basically says, we know this is inconvenient for you, and if you're pissed off, which you probably should be, call Mayor Adams right now and give the phone number. Right, so you wanna take that anger, acknowledge it, but try and move them into something. Solidarity spaces, we used to call them convergence spaces, where you could come, get training, get art, get community, get healthcare, get legal, right? They are essential. New York has lots of spaces, but we don't have one space dedicated to our movement per se. There's different ones. And then the last thing I just wanted to say, solidarity strikes their edge. Yeah, maybe that's, I mean, I think that, you know, we get so focused on the issues that we work on that we sometimes lose sight of the systemic oppression. And I've often my experience over the years is that when we cross the lines that they've set to divide us, whether it's race or class or step, whatever it may be, we unleash some power. And whether you're fighting on housing or on food or immigration, it's the same dynamics everywhere, and a lot of it ultimately is the same evil people that are controlling it. And so if we focus a little bit more, not just on the issues, some of which are urgent and immediate, but more on building the infrastructure and the relationships where if something happens in the immigrant community, we all know we turn out.
Right.
And so the last thing I'll say is that having some sort of council structure, table structure, a place where we can come together, both organizations and self-organized groups, to be in relationship to one another, knowing that we take the lead of the community who's been most impacted at the moment that we're mobilizing. So I think we can build these things, we just have to build these things.
Right on, thank you. Speakers, if y'all want to add anything, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think on risk, I think it's a gradual thing. You have to like welcome people into it by gradually bringing them into it, right? Why I mentioned the JVP actions was because we started with soft blockade, right? We started with, let's sit here together. And then over the course of months, more and more people were able to be like, hey, actually, this isn't gonna ruin my whole freaking life to have an arrest on my record, right? And like really providing all the information someone needs to know about whatever could happen, and building that trust. I also think on the note of creativity, you also have to have like a real logic to an action, right? Like if you are, it's like, okay, what is this spicy thing gonna accomplish to get us where we need to be? When there's that explicit logic and people can see it, and they see that the thing they're potentially losing by taking that risk, they can weigh that. That's when you can make the concrete decision instead of a more amorphous, what do I get arrested for what? And then, yeah, I thank you, Lisa, for pointing out that it was outbound traffic, right? So we thought of this. We were like, okay, we will stop it. The cars will have gone, and so no one will be trapped on the bridge itself. That said, there were two places in that landscape where people were stuck. It was the loop coming onto the Brooklyn Bridge, and I don't remember what the other was, but there was another place. And we had a lot of flyers, we had snacks, we had water, we had de-escalators. Even then, it was really, really tough. I ended up briefly crying on I was on the Brooklyn Bridge, and I was on the loop, and someone was really, really upset, and I was really, really upset. But it's, yeah, you just have to, some of it is like connecting human to human. That's what de-escalation is, right? And one thing I saw at the JFK, one of the JFK actions is those organizers collected funds in advance to hand out to Uber drivers, to cab drivers. So that, like major, just thinking about especially like working class folks, right? Like, and then in terms of like tying that to the systemic work, like the 1,000 cuts thing, right? Like just, I won't go on, but also on infrastructure for coming together, like Lisa said, there's a lot of different spaces. People have a lot of feelings and a lot of thoughts, and like there's security and blah, blah. And, but one thing I'll share, like right now I'm in the process of like organizing with some folks around like some sort of coalition of diaspora organizations, right? Like, have been talking to like Sudanese justice organization, Armenian and Kurdish folks, and there's a rally on Saturday bringing together like various diaspora organizations. So like, and like, that work is happening, right? It's just like still in different pockets maybe, like working on an event bringing together various library projects, right? And one of those is like the libraries and archivists for Palestine, and one is the Prison Library Support Network. So, but there's so much in this city. So it's like one hub for all of it. It's more like lots of hubs for pockets of it. And then in terms of what I'm working on, one of them is Salam. Some of my Salam comrades are here,
Hey.
which is South Asian left. That's like where we're building trying to do some coalition building. One is the Parole Preparation Project. We work with people serving long and life sentences in New York State prisons to support them in getting out of prison. So check that out. And one is Apogee Journal, which committed to PACB, trying to center and take on work by censored folks. So I don't know, I can write those somewhere at some point, but yeah, check it out.
Thank you. Juan Carlos, you want to share anything? We'll get to hear from Juan Carlos, and then we'll kick it back to y'all for maybe one or two more
and
thoughts.
just one thought, in terms of this being hyper-local. I have seen it over and over that that's what it works. Why? Because your neighbor knows you the best. They know what you need, they know, what pains you, what are your dreams, and that's how we've been organizing in Sunset Park, in Bay Ridge, and this line of affected, directly affected and directly impacted, and they know the solidarity groups around them. It's just knowing your place also, knowing that sometimes we have this sense that the people that are being victimized or somehow being dehumanized have not much to offer. Just kind of debunking that, questioning that, and really looking at the person as a person, because otherwise we replicate these dynamics of power that make the other less. So we need to create those solidarity spaces, right there, of those impacted, directly impacted. That I don't like. The whole distinction of directly, indirectly impacted. I know what it is driving at, but I think we need to cognitively challenge those dynamics and come to those spaces where our common humanity can be, uplifted. And from there we can work in terms of organizing holistically and caring for one another.
So thinking about how to be able to address various issues, being focused on broad intersectional power without becoming too diffuse. What does that look like specifically in the New York context? All of these different issues that we're confronting. Where does wellness and care come into direct action? And this question of love and creating actions to create a specific future, not just leaving that to those who are in power currently.
Couple things real quick, not New York, but Austin, Texas.
Hey.
I lived there for 18 years, and probably in 2013 I said, I'm not gonna work on issues anymore, we're gonna work on racism. And we began an organizing process and a training process with the People's Institute for Survival Beyond. And since then, we've trained tens of thousands of people in Austin. Even the city's training people and paying to train people, big story. But what happened is it completely changed what was happening in the city, because racism is such a slippery thing, and the supremacies, all the supremacies, they're in everything we do. And when we began to have a shared understanding of history, a shared language, a shared definition, we knew how to talk with each other now across race. And people of color, particularly Black people in Austin, were like, okay, maybe I can trust some of these white people. And since that whole process happened, we defeated the police contract, we defeated ordinances against criminalization of unhoused people, we got the city to pay universal wage to people that were poor during COVID. I mean, like a lot of radical systemic shit happened. I mean, it was stunning. And it was all because we chose race as our point of entry on how we were gonna organize. Lots of stuff came down. I want a couple other things really quick. In my years in the street also, I used to run with the witches, and we would do ritual at actions in the streets. And it was amazing when you do ritual in the streets or ceremony or whatever language you want to use, you see people come. Because we are hungry for spirit. I made a big change for me when I learned to make a distinction between religion and spirituality. But that spirit and our ancestors and the elements, all of these things are part of the world and a part of our power, and we have a lot of energies that are working with us, that want us to succeed at what we're doing. And so I think that's a very important place to hold, but not in the context of like, oh, this nice spiritual wellness thing over here. You know, we are all traumatized living in this country. We can't not be traumatized when you live under white supremacy. And trauma happens during direct action. But direct action, if you do it in a good way, can be healing and liberating. And we have the benefit of knowing now a lot more about trauma and our nervous system, and we've had so much growing stuff around cultures of care that I feel very optimistic about what could be our future of greater health, rooted both in spirit and community, because that's part of what heals trauma. Yes, love. Yes, power mapping. The mayor and these people in power. I do think that they're all getting off really easy. And I think if we did our job to power map even deeper, and we know the ground on which we want to fight, we can create mass social disruption. And that's when we have their attention, and they have to make a change. They can withstand a lot of stuff, and again, part of the strategy around this stuff is like they don't give a shit about us. But when we start intervening in the world and the people that they care about, and disrupting that thing, then they have to respond in some way. So I think there's more strategic stuff we can do to go after those people in power. And the last thing I'll just say, there's probably many other things to say among all my words I write down, is that in mid-April, there are an effort, a larger collective effort to have material impact on April 15th. And we might think about what might be happening more in New York, but there's other stuff. And then the other thing in mid-April is there's going to be another international flotilla of ships challenging the blockade of Gaza in an attempt to deliver humanitarian aid. People may remember the Mavi Marmara years ago that the Israelis attacked and killed a number of people. Well, an international delegation is meeting again in mid-April, and it's going to be important for people all around the world to be paying attention to that, because it's attempting to create another international crisis for Israel at this time. So that's another piece of work coming up ahead that people should pay attention to and could support.
I'll say two things. I think in line with what Lisa said, you have to be focused in your intersectionality, right? Like, so the stuff I've been I come from an abolitionist organizing background, right? So I was super excited to work on an action at the intersection of Palestine solidarity and Cop City, right? And we made material connections there, right? We were like, this company funds settlements and also has the contract like the insurance contract for allowing Cop City to be built. So making some of those, you'd be surprised. It is all the same frickin' people, like seriously. So making those, making those material connections and being like, literally, we're going after the same target, I think is a really good entrance way to like, it just requires a lot of research, honestly. And so focused in your intersectionality, targeted against, again, like creating the logic and the reason for it. And then I will say, I feel like, Adams isn't getting enough shit, but I will say, like, he is a part of every power map, right? Like, he is there. And even like I was at maybe some of this doesn't get covered as much, right? But like, there was a No Tech for Apartheid action where Adams was speaking and everyone yelled their faces off at him. So, it's part of, like, even in the Palestine solidarity work where we're there to protest like Google sponsored conference that's blah blah, it's still like Adams is there and we're gonna like mess with him. So like, he is a part of every power map for sure. And I hope we keep agitating him because he sucks. And then on wellness, I just wanted to say, like,
Y'all can say yes. Yeah. You
yeah,
can say
yeah.
yes. Go ahead.
People are struggling. Everyone's struggling. It's really sad and bad, and hard. And it's hard to care about your own struggle because you're like, who the hell am I to be sad right now when there's a genocide going on, right? But you have to care, because otherwise you will burn out, and that's not helpful for anyone. And I think for me, as someone who really struggles with prioritizing caring for myself, tying it back into why it's bad for the movement is a very helpful way to see why that care is important. But what I'll say on a material direction, a comrade who basically was like, I see this, they do harm reduction work, and they were like, this is so bad, like, and in their words, brought together some of the most burnt out MFs they know, and brought a psychiatrist and all these healing practitioners together, and now we have this little cohort, and we're gonna meet like every 2 weeks or so, and they're just like offering, like creating a space for like care collectively. And I just think that's something. Like, this psychiatrist was amazing. I have so much trauma with the medical industrial complex, and this guy was just like, yeah, they're terrible, but like, I'm here with you, and like, we're talking about like, it's just like, there's ways you get to build something else, you know? You don't have to, it doesn't have to be the space you're already in. You can find people, you can find a comrade, be like, find your burnt out MS, and let's take care of each other. Deeply, deeply, deeply special offering, maybe one of the most special things I've experienced in the whole last few months, is for someone to see that and try to offer me care. So.
Thank you for bringing that reminder. And last but definitely not least, Bree and Juan Carlos, if you'd like to offer any concluding thoughts.
Yes. I think that when it comes to intersectionality and focus, those are things that have been very aspirational for me, even to the level that the organization that I've dedicated most of my time to is called Collective Focus. But are we always collectively focused? Honestly, we're not. And it's in large part because we're all coming from so many different backgrounds, life experiences, level of education, level of communication skills. And there can be a lot of kind of clashes in that, and then a lot of kind of different, like a whole medley of like priorities. And sometimes I think you kind of have to be okay with that and not be so rigid on having this like big cohesive picture, because that's the kind of thing that turns into like the millennial beige phenomenon. I don't know if anyone tracks with that, but this kind of like this impulse that we have to kind of like smooth things over so that it's an easy story to tell. Like when I was giving you my presentation, like I went from all over the place. I went from indigenous, but like mostly environmental activism on the streets, to food justice with refrigerators, to supporting the Nasavi indigenous group of Pitoronico with their cultural festivals and their events. And like if I had sat and like paralyzed myself to worry about like, okay, how does what I'm doing in 2024 connect to what I was doing in like 2020 or 2015? I would always be just like looking at the past and not just allowing like myself that grace to just breathe and surrender to the people that come into my life and ask me for help. And like being there to like really listen to those people and who they are is one of the most important things for that kind of awareness of knowing how to end up in the direction that you're really actually supposed to go and to feel fulfilled and with that intention. So just kind of letting it happen organically, I think, is my suggestion. As far as Adams, I would say that I personally feel like I'm an impacted person with him because I'll just tell you guys a story that we never really had a moment to complain publicly about him with, but when he first became elected, one of the very first things he did when he was in office was he cut the food to collective focus for like 6 months. And that actually affected 500 organizations all over the city like ours, which are these like little micro organizations that do these small scale food pantries and we feed about 100 families per week. 500 of us had our food cut with no notice. And this was in February. And just remember one day, we waited outside in the snow for 5 hours with 100 families on the streets. We waited for 5 hours because we really were counting on that food. Like, people were not willing to leave and give up hope that that truck was coming with food because they needed it to feed their families. But for 6 months, we didn't have any food from this program because what Adams had done is that when he went into office, he just immediately halted all the things that de Blasio was doing. And because that program, it was called the PFRED program under de Blasio, it was a pandemic response initiative. I guess he didn't like the way it was being run or just the kind of egotistical bravado of these high-powered officials. He just said, whatever de Blasio is doing it, we're just not going to do it. And that's how much power this man has. And 500 organizations were scrambling, we were calling, we were trying to find a truck, and we just didn't get a truck for like 6 months until he got his shit together. He just rebranded the program, slapped a new name on it, made us jump through hoops to re-qualify for it, and then we finally got our food again. And even with all of that, I would say that like I try to keep like the amount of space that he occupies in my brain and in my mind like as small as possible, because he already has so much power. Like I don't want to give him in my personal life any more power. And just from the experience that I had as like this college kid that would like go to the board of trustee meetings and like really like yell or even sometimes that we would just like hurl insults at them at these meetings because we just couldn't get them to even just focus their eyes. Like you could see their eyes were completely glazed over. And like when it's at that level of detachment, because people are so detached from their humanity at that level, I try to even comfort myself in just seeing like how much that person's soul is suffering and how disconnected from spirit that person is and how I can't get sucked into that because otherwise I'm just like, how am I going to persevere through all my hardships? And so in terms of spirit and self-care and spirituality and all of those things, very important to the things that I do, I would say that that very insular practice of self-care and self-soothing and analyzing our traumas and doing all that deep dive research into our psyches is very fundamental, and it will always be put to the test as soon as you throw yourself into organizing spaces because you will be challenged, and this work will poke holes in all of the progress that you think you've made over and over and over again. And it's actually an important part of the process. So you really would be surprised how little that work actually is sustainable or leads to real sustained healing as soon as you get out of your bubble and go into these spaces. So I just want to prepare people who maybe haven't made that leap into these organizing spaces to just be aware that there will be chaos, there will be inner turmoil, there will be complex teaching moments, and to not shy away from it. And if it does happen, it's not that there's something wrong with you or wrong with the people that you're organizing, it's just that we're all coming from like a really damaged place, and just to allow that to be part of the process is important.
Thank you, Bree. Go ahead and Carlos. And thank y'all for holding focus for a few more minutes.
Just turn to the person next to you or look for somebody. Please. Acknowledge the person. And thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. This is the people that we are going to be working. Okay, so that's it. We begin here. This is it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. So I hope that you feel a sense of conviction, a sense of inspiration. Hopefully it's not just hunger. Such immense gratitude to Lisa, Minahil, Bree, and Juan Carlos. Institute, to the New School for hosting us, and we'll be back for that, the occupation. To Joel and to Pao for interpreting, to Luigi for documentation, and to all of our movements as we're continuing to grow and evolve and connect with each other. We have a world to transform, and really thrilled to be in this loving struggle with you all. Encourage you to continue to follow the work that we're doing with Shape of Cities to Come. Please remember to return the headsets that you had gotten before you boogie, and you may see some copies of New York Liberation School. Feel free to take a look at that too. But a round of applause to everyone for coming out tonight. Thank you.